Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Lori, and I'm joined today by a big group. We're adding people, as you know, from our last episode to the DBT Skills group. I'm so excited to have all of these different perspectives from literally 3 continents, which is very cool. So today, maybe I'll just get everybody to introduce themselves really briefly in a second. So for those of you who are new to this series, we're going through the book DBT for Life by Diana Partington as a bit of a guide to help us talk about DBT skills, how we use them, how we don't use them, any insights that we have in case it's helpful for anyone. And it's honestly been super helpful for me just to have a reason to talk about like a specific DBT skill every week. For the record, none of us are clinicians. We're not here to be clinicians. We are not counselors, not therapists, not psychologists. We're just here as people with lived experience of BPD or being in remission of BPD or being super feelers. And we're here to just chat about how we use this in our own lives. So maybe we'll just do a round of like brief introductions. So maybe Dave, do you want to just introduce yourself and kind of where you're from generally and your deal?
I'm Dave. I live in Miami. I've been coming to Super Feelers for a while, and I've done a couple of these other episodes here. Other than that, that's probably enough for now.
A couple of these other episodes. I think you've done 13 of these episodes. That's a lot more than a couple, but I'm always super happy to have you. Heather, how about yourself?
I'm Heather, and I'm in Georgia in the U.S., and I have BPD and lots of other things. And I have been probably only learning DBT skills for the past year, max. So I'm kind of learning some of this as I go.
Awesome. Love it. Kat.
I'm Kat. I am in and from Scotland. I've been sort of working around DBT for just over a couple of years now. And it's kind of slowly seeping into my brain.
As it does. That's the whole point. Really quickly, Dave, how many years have you been like learning DBT?
A little over 3.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And then Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm joining from Australia. I'm very new to the Super Feelers group, which I'm very excited about being able to join, even though I've been there for a little while. These guys have played a big role in my life since being diagnosed with BPD. I first started DBT probably about 4 years ago, and it is the most successful kind of therapy that I have found and works really well for me, but I do like to refresh it because there's a lot in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny because like even this book doesn't cover all of the skills, which I didn't even think about the other day. Like we could keep going after this. Not that I'm going to hold you all hostage, but to talk about skills that aren't even in this book. Yeah, and I guess I didn't give the context of how long I've been doing DBT. So I was like 19 or 20 when I started DBT, and I'm 31 now. So like 10 or 11 years is when I was first introduced to DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, for those of you who I always try and avoid acronyms when I can. And I only did groups. So I did the skills groups. I never had like individual counseling for DBT, but these skills have like helped me stay alive for over a decade. So really happy to be here. And there's always new things that I learn from talking to each of you. So really happy to be here. Okay, with that, we're going to talk about chapter 13 of this book, which is about values and creating a life worth living. So what's particularly interesting to me about this, just right off the bat, is this isn't actually like a DBT skill. It's intertwined with a lot of DBT skills. And I think the point of like creating a life worth living is kind of like the point of DBT, but it's not, as far as I remember, it's not a DBT skill in itself. Is that your guys' understanding too? Yeah. So it's just kind of an interesting thing that she put this in here as its own skill. So for those of you who are new to the series, each of the chapters starts with a beautiful story based on the author's experiences with her clients. And so Heather's going to just kind of give a little synopsis of the story today and how it connects with values.
Okay, so the story follows Skylar, a teenager who just is pretty hopeless, doesn't believe in himself, his future, being capable of having a happy life. He doesn't believe in his therapist or therapy. And along the way, with guidance and his therapist just believing in him and DBT skills, he is able to recognize that regardless of the hardships, like being a trans kid, he can still build a life that is meaningful for him. And he does start on the path to that by the end of the short story. And it's honestly, it was really beautiful. I took a lot from this story.
Thanks so much for the summary, Heather. I wish this went without saying, but we're recording this in February of 2025. And obviously the world or the US government is, systematically attacking the existence of trans people. And I think this chapter recording kind of comes at a good time to have a story about a trans person, because obviously their lives are 100% valid. They are valid, everything about them. And I think all of us stand beside them through this disgusting mess that is going on. So just have to say that. I wish I didn't have to say that, but here we are. So speaking of creating a life worth living, I mean, that's really the tagline of dialectical behavior therapy, right? Like that's what Marsha Linehan, who created the therapy, that's her memoir's name. That's like kind of her like mantra, I guess, of like the goal of this is to make life worth living again. And, this chapter is all about values. And like, I'm curious for you guys, are values exercises like this easy, hard? Like, what is your like take on thinking about your values and how to stick with them?
It's kind of made me realize that I hadn't really analyzed my values often, more just like focusing on surviving instead of creating the life worth living. And it's kind of really just turned my mind around. And turning the mind was something we learned. That was another story. But the big thing that stuck out in this story, it's a huge part of DBT skills, but the pain happens, suffering optional. That is just like, I want everyone to know that. I want it to resonate with everyone, because we really create a lot of our own suffering accidentally.
Yeah, accidentally for sure, right? And it's funny because Diana Partington, the author of this book, her Instagram handle is suffering optional. So you can tell that this is like very, very relevant in her life. How about anybody else? Like, what do values mean to you?
I don't think I had space to even know what my values were before I started DBT. I think I had worked so hard at just managing that I didn't look that far into it, because it felt like something that was unattainable when you are just figuring out how to survive. So the first time that I looked at my values and did a exercise that was very similar to the one that's in Diana's book, a big thing for me in my values is justice. And once I started to identify what my values were, it was a lot easier to start to identify what my triggers were as well. And I didn't realize how intertwined those two things are. The things that really caused me big issues, like injustice, was directly linked to my core fundamental values. And so I think even though I felt like it was a bit of a frivolous exercise at the time, it is so important to understand your core values, because it helps frame where a lot of our feelings come from on any given day or on any given topic.
Yeah, that justice is a huge one for me too. And that is where my anger comes out the most, I think.
Yeah, mine too.
Inequity, injustice. And without recognizing that, you're like, why am I so angry all the time? Like, maybe because the world is not a very just place. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I spent a long time, probably kind of into my kind of mid-20s, living what I was quote unquote supposed to do. And then I remember just sitting in a lecture, it was just this random kind of thing, and I was like, do I actually want any of this stuff? And then that kind of percolated away for quite a long time. And then I was kind of really struggling maybe 4 years ago. And I kind of decided, I was like, right, if I'm going to be around, then I want to have meaning. I read Viktor Frankl's book, which is amazing. And also the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which is also amazing and kind of refocused everything. And I think for me, it's about being authentic and being in service of others and like being a presence of loving kindness. Very much kind of like the Buddhist kind of bodhisattva kind of view of everything.
That's so interesting to be sitting somewhere and going like, wait, why am I doing this? I think that's like such a good point. Dave, you you nodded a lot during what Kat was saying. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I will also give a plug for Viktor Frankl. I think I had sort of two thoughts. One is that I think for me, like certain words just have like certain meanings baked into them that make it really hard for me to do exercises like this. And so I know we're going to talk about radical acceptance later, and the word acceptance was one that it was more like the word itself than anything. And values, I think, in the US, the word values, unfortunately, has a lot of stuff baked into it, where when people talk about values, a lot of times what they're talking about is a lot of really toxic views of, like that, like anti, there are only two genders, and in a marriage, there's a man and a woman. Like this, in some ways, values has been the word values has been hijacked by those kind of ideas. And so I never really, I think, like everyone else was sort of expressing, it wasn't something that I didn't understand why I would want to look at that. And then when I was away, and so I was in treatment for 3 or 4 months, largely DBT based earlier this year. And one of the more valuable things I think I did was do a values exercise, like a values inventory, kind of similar to what is in this chapter. And I think that one of the things that made it helpful is I looked not just at the values that I wanted to have in my life or that I was working on developing that were positive, but I also looked at the values that I had throughout my life before I got into DBT, like values like I'm terrible, I'm sneaky, I'm a bad friend, like, things that more like core beliefs. Looking at values more as core beliefs than as values. And it was really helpful both to see like the things that I believed and to think about like, well, to what extent do I still believe these things about myself? And then also to look at the things I was trying to similarly look at the things that I was interested in, and and did I actually want to be these things? And looking at as it says in the chart here, the ones that are important, taking action, important, not acting on it, doesn't matter to me. Just looking at just trying to figure out like, do I care about being a leader? Do I care about being part of a community that shares my interests? Do I care about being in nature? Do I care about being famous? Like all these kind of things. And so I've found that doing these kinds of specific exercises has been a really it was hard for me to do it in the abstract, and then doing it in a more rigorous way like this, I found at least really helpful.
So many good points there, and I really love your thought on like what aren't my values, or like I guess maybe difference between core beliefs and values, because as we've been having this conversation, I've been thinking about the concept of like family values, which you kind of alluded to in like terms of how that's been corrupted in the States. But depending on who you talk to, I'm sure they think that we've corrupted it. But anyways, that's the other thing. But the concept of family values, I think I've learned isn't important to me. Like in the traditional sense of family.
It's essentially religious.
It totally. And I think a lot of them are, right? Like they've kind of been used as like, modesty would be a value, I suppose. And it's like, well, I'm not, that comes from religious stuff too. Yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on just that in general?
I think kind of differentiating from that is hard. But also it kind of gives the freedom to choose what you actually define as success.
Yeah, I've been finding. So is it give fast is like kind of goes along with Dear Man. I don't know if we really went into it in this series or not, but and I can never remember what it stands for. So does anybody know off the top of their head? It's
The
like
give skills are the ones about the give skills are the ones about the value of the relationship, and the fast ones are like self-respect.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So like, but yeah, like valuing the relationship, even the self-respect thing. Like, I think without knowing your values, that's a lot harder to do, right? Because you can, or at least for me, when I'm trying to navigate like interpersonal challenges, I'm like, why am I so angry? Or like, why have I split on this person? Or like, why do I believe this so fundamentally? And without being able to like distill down to like Shannon was saying, like this value of like justice or like authenticity, it's harder to like wrap your head around the cause. I don't know. At least for me, I think that's one of the reasons that this is helpful, and like not falling into the trap of, well, I'm supposed to, I mean, it's all coming back to family values for whatever reason, but like, I'm supposed to like find a boyfriend, get married, have kids, love my blood family, help them when they're older, then they die and I grieve. Do you know what I mean? Like those are all kind of like connected to the value of like family above all. And so trying to learn that like if things aren't a value for me or an important value for me, that I don't have to just follow the path that people anticipate you're going to follow. I don't know. Maybe I'm like overthinking this.
I really liked that this exercise had the option for it matters to my parents. I hadn't seen a values exercise like that before. And so it really forced me to see where that value comes from. Is it something that I personally believe, or is it something that I think I should believe because I've been told it's right?
Yeah.
And a really good example of this, I rated very low in the caring scale on anything to do with financial stuff. My priorities, and it's always been a bit of a bone of contention, I think, and maybe it's a generational thing, like with my age group versus my parents' age group, is that their value was, home, the way that your house looked, purchasing a house. And we own our own home, but my values personally is to go and have experiences with my kids when they're young. And it's very different. And it's caused that little bit of tension because they don't place value on the same thing. So it's like a criticism of, well, shouldn't you guys be spending that money on recladding the house? But I actually just don't care about that stuff. So I really loved that part of, does this matter to you or does it matter to your parents? And is it just something that's ingrained into you because you think it is what you should feel?
Well, and they also have the supposed to matter but doesn't.
Yeah, it was great.
I love that, which is more one that I filled out than others. And funnily enough, because Shannon's really into nature, if you've listened to her episode of the podcast and experiences, there's one on here about a value of spending time in nature. And I put supposed to matter but doesn't. And then I put a little note that said, I wish it did. And there's a few that I just, I'm like, yeah, I really wish that I cared about this, or I wish that I cared less about this. There's one about live a productive life. And I put, I wish this mattered less. So that reflection in itself is valuable.
Yeah, like I like that it kind of picked up in this story about how hard it is to be outside of what society expects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the pressure to kind of be like normal. I hate that word, but and every time there's a difference, it's just another kind of challenge to your own view of reality, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I think I really struggled before I was diagnosed with even knowing who I was as a person. So to try and live a life based on values back then was an incredibly difficult thing for me to do, because if you don't know who you are, how do you know what you value? So I really appreciated having these opportunities, because a lot of my rhetoric around myself, like Dave mentioned before, was that negative self-talk. I'm fundamentally a bad person. Bad things happen to me because this is what I deserve. And I had conditioned myself to live like that for a very, very long time with that internal dialogue. So then to sit and do something like this, where I can literally circle the things that create that feeling in me. I can't look at a values exercise and go, oh, yeah, Shannon, you actually are a pretty shit person, when I can see the things in front of me that I care about, because the things that I care about, really great people would care about as well. So I think there's kind of that too, so, like, didn't realize how important it was to understand your values before I even knew they were a thing.
Yeah, it's kind of radical, just being like, I have a right to choose what is important to me. And it's a big thing.
And I think because of our, like, people with borderlines shifting of identity, quote unquote, problem, like our kind of chameleon like nature in some ways, which is of course like a survival technique. But I don't know, I have a hard time being like, I'm like, I know this is my value. Like, for example, like justice, that is 100% my value. I know that causes a lot of problems for me because of how strongly I feel about justice, but is also important. Same with authenticity. And then I start going like, well, if my values change, am I a hypocrite? And that's another negative self-talk thing that I have a really hard time with, is like hypocrisy in general. So then when I start seeing myself as a hypocrite, then I start spiraling, right? And I'm sure that there's people here, not in this room necessarily, but people listening to this that are like, I have such a hard time with figuring out what my values are, because my values and my like life circumstances change so often that I can't necessarily like whittle it down to something clear for myself.
I think, yeah, like, because I'm quite dissociative. So, yeah, like, sometimes it does change, and like different parts have different values. And, for a lot of them, like, safety is the most important thing. So I can go off on a tangent trying to feel safe, and then be like, oh, actually, that's actually making this situation worse. It kind of takes getting back into wise mind to do that.
I would say values can change, right? And I think that, not speaking for everyone, but again, and Shannon, you put it so beautifully, but I think that the experience of having difficulty developing my own sense of self and patterning it on other people, to me, that has to lead directly to hanging on to this idea that values are values are values, and that mine can't change to the extent that I feel them, because they weren't even, in many cases, they weren't based on me. They were based on what I thought someone else wanted for me. It says matters to my parents, I would add partner or favorite person of any kind. And it occurs to me that must make it really hard for me to accept when my values change, because again, they weren't about what was important to me. They were about what was important to someone else, who, and being attached to that person was the most important thing in my entire life. So, and I just wanted everything to freeze in place and not change, so I wouldn't lose them. So we grow. We have new experiences. The world changes around us, and our values are allowed to change too.
I think sometimes as we grow and learn, when you know better, you do better. And I have seen that's probably the biggest space where my own personal values have shifted, and because as I understand more about myself and the world, I care more about experiences for myself and other people. And I think that's where that changes, which doesn't make me a hypocrite. It actually means I'm committing to learning and understanding experiences from other people's perspectives. And so maybe we should give ourselves a little bit of a break, because
Totally.
it is incredible to be able to say, here is something that I value now that I didn't really know anything about before. So yeah, maybe we need to be kinder to ourselves as we move through that and figure it out.
I would say yes, we absolutely do, regardless of what we're talking about. And it's funny because I don't think that I would be like as hard on somebody else changing their opinion. Right?
Oh, no.
But I'm always hard on myself. And yeah, I don't like that about myself, but it is just what it is for me, I think, you know?
Well, I think something like chronic illness finally kind of taught me was that, like, even though those core values don't change, but like your ability to like act on them and you know, move forward with them changes. You know, whether that's mental health or physical health, and allowing that to just be what it is.
Yeah, like distilling it down to those like few that are just prevalent throughout everything. In the book, she specifically talks about vision boarding, and I'm curious if any of you do that. First of all, for some reason, I feel like Heather might have a vision board.
I don't, but I actually texted my friends today when I was rereading the chapters and asked if they wanted to do that later together.
Fun.
And they do want to, so I will next time have a vision board.
Oh my God, can you send it to us? I want to see.
Yes, absolutely.
One of my friends is totally on it, so I'm in the process of building mine.
Nice.
My vision board is the screensaver on my computer, like the wallpaper, so I see it every day. I love making vision boards. I don't think I'm a manifester. Like, I don't do it in the sense of that thing, but the stuff that I want to remind myself. Every year I set a word. So people do New Year's resolutions. I'm crap at that kind of stuff. But I pick a word every year. And so my word this year is observe. So everything on my vision board is around what I want to do to make that thing happen. So I can send you a picture of it, Laurie. And I make them on Canva. I don't do it on the cutting out, pasting thing. It's quite easy to do it when it's just digital, and then I can print it and put it wherever I want it to be. So, but I like having it as the wallpaper on my computer. So when I open it up, I'm on my computer obviously a lot. When I open it up, it's the first thing that I see each day.
Yeah, I think that's great. I would love if you send a photo of it. That'd be really cool. I also it's funny that you said you use Canva instead of magazines or whatever, because she actually says in the book something that I think is so brilliant about it's common to clip images from old magazines. That means the magazine content will be shaping the direction of your vision rather than the vision directing the images you choose. And I was like, that is such a good point that I wouldn't have really considered, because I remember in elementary school or whatever, we would take all the old magazines and we'd cut out pictures, and it would be like these skinny girls with big boobs at a beach. You're never going to see someone that looks like me in a magazine, especially 20 years ago, And to me, that was just such a brilliant reminder of how in such a tangible way, the world shapes what our values are, because all you're seeing is what somebody else in an ad company somewhere decided you should see. And I just thought that was a really cool, concept to think about. All right. Any other thoughts on values, things that people really wanted to talk about today, value-wise?
I have a couple little things highlighted.
Yeah, go for it, Heather.
Okay, so first of all, I was kind of wondering if this is the BPD experience where Skylar hated feeling stupid. That's my biggest trigger. I will not, part of why I don't fully live a life that I value is because I won't take steps to do things that might make me feel stupid sometimes. And that's just, I don't know, I just wanted to relate to that and figured that you guys could relate too. And then it was cool and weird how much she believed in him, talking about his therapist. I feel that on such a deep level. Like, it's so great when someone finally like shows you that they believe in you and you're worth something, but it's so odd. You don't know how. We kind of talked about this on the last episode. That I don't know how to receive it. So it's cool and weird. Just also related to that. And then my very favorite part of the story was he said, "I'm skilling the shit out of my life. There's no stopping me." And I just loved that. And I feel that way. And
I love that too. I thought that was so brilliant. We've all been there. We're like, absolutely, yes. Look at how many skills I used today. Marsha is sitting somewhere and she's thrilled for me.
I really like
Shannon.
that part too, where they talked about breaking it down into tiny little manageable pieces. And I can't remember the name. It started with K, the Japanese philosophy behind it.
Kaizen,
Was that
I think?
Yeah, Kaizen. Z-E-N. I really loved that part, and that without knowing it, because I'm a procrastinator, and it's because I'm scared to fail. So it's easier sometimes not to try. And when I did my inpatient stay after a suicide attempt, am I allowed to mention that? Is that okay?
Totally. Yeah.
I really struggled because I was even angry at myself that I failed at that. And I didn't know how to move forward. And the psychologist in the hospital gave me a little building block analogy that each day we were just going to try and get 3 blocks. And I could put on those blocks whatever I wanted. So it might be, today I just brushed my teeth and I left my room and I ate a meal. And then as I started to build into being able to do more and do more therapy and participate in more workshops and classes and connect with people, that little building block analogy got higher and higher. Like each day there was more and more building blocks on that. And I use that analogy all the time now for goal setting because I get very overwhelmed by the big picture and I don't know how to start it when it's so big and scary. So this little it was really nice to just have a name and see that it's an actual thing, like it's an actual philosophy, this weird little thing where I'm imagining kids' wooden building blocks on top of each other. But it works now for all of my goal setting. I can break it down into small, manageable pieces and I can just take tiny steps forward, which makes me so much less mad at myself than when I'm in that freeze state and I can't do anything towards it. I know I want it, but I just don't know how to get there. So those tiny little steps, I really loved that part where I actually found a nice little philosophy to suit the thing that I'm doing with the weird little wood blocks. So that was good. I liked it.
Yeah, I want to read like just a little bit of this paragraph because I feel like, first of all, there's like so much brilliance from Japan. Like so much quality improvement that's used in healthcare comes like directly from Japanese car manufacturing. And it's super interesting because they just like, there's something about the way that they like think through problems and like action and change that just like really translates to so many different things. Anyways, so this I'm just going to read like the first half of this paragraph because I think it's actually like really cool to kind of get into the weeds a bit. So for people who struggle with anxiety, action steps can be really overwhelming. Kaizen is a strategy from Japanese psychology that helps us tiptoe past our amygdala, which is the alarm system in our brain for change, fear, and anger. With Kaizen, the focus is taking very, very tiny baby steps towards your goal. These steps can be so small that they're almost embarrassing. Like, I'm not that it's embarrassing, but Shannon, like you said, like I brushed my teeth today, I brushed my hair, right? And yet this is a strategy that helped Japan rebuild after World War II and launched Toyota into a major global company. So ask yourself, what's one very small action that I can take towards my goal? That might be spending 1 minute of your day fantasizing about what your life might be like if you achieved your goal. And I think in some ways, this is what I love so much about in the Super Feelers Club. Like through peer support, we start every session with celebrating successes or like anything that you've done. And like those successes range from literally like, I didn't want to come today and I came anyway, which is a huge success, to like, I just graduated with my master's degree, or I just got into law school, or whatever it is. And I just love that, like, sometimes when we start the peer support sessions, people will be like, oh, I don't have any successes. And once we get through like the first 2-3 people, those hands just keep going up, because you start recognizing that, oh, wait, I also had this success. And it's these tiny things that like you never would celebrate on your own, but we can celebrate together. And I think it's so important to be able to do that.
I actually have a quote on my wall from a guy called James Clear, which is, every action you take is a vote for the person you want to become. That for me reminds me about the baby steps, because it's like, like you say, what's one tiny thing you can do?
Yeah.
I like how in
That's
the
a great
book he
quote.
picks up on, like, it might just be like fantasizing about what you want for like 2 minutes. I love that. That's a
Totally. I am very bad at because I'm so good at coming up with things I need to do to be the person I want to be, in that like I have to-do lists that are miles long, and then I beat myself up over not being able to complete my to-do lists. And then I'm like, Lori, you're the one who created this due date. Like, chill the fuck out. Like, you can just change the date. Nobody else knows. And so that is like, there's a fine balance for me between that, like, doing things that try and get to my goals versus trying too hard to get to something that is only achievable by like hurting myself in a being too productive way. But I think it really depends on like what you're working on. And I love the like, yeah, each action is a step towards the person, or a vote towards the person you want to be. I think that's really cool.
This kind of plays off what you were just saying, but I wasn't familiar with Kaizen. Is that how you say it? I think so. Familiar with that strategy. And something I've always struggled with, like you said, is like just having a linear plan. My brain just doesn't do that. It's like I get what I need to do to start. I get where the end is, but what's in between. And this kind of really opened my eyes to just taking the baby steps. Like, as long as you're working your way towards it, you're getting somewhere instead of just staying stuck.
Yeah, thanks for that, Heather. That's a great point. All right. With that, let's wrap up values. And I mean, not that you could ever wrap up values, but I do totally encourage people to take a look at some values, like exercises online, because I'm sure there's millions of them. And just like as a exploration into what is important to you. Yeah, happy to hear back from people if anybody does something and goes like, wow, I had never really thought of this before. Thank you so much for listening to the Super Feeler podcast. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you'd like to learn more about the Super Feeler podcast, share your story, or participate in the Super Feelers Club, which is our peer support group, it's totally free, virtual, and open to anyone who experiences intense emotions or has borderline personality disorder, please check out the link in our show notes or go to laurieedmondson.com. If you would like to support the show, we would very much appreciate it. There's an option to do monthly small donations at whatever denomination you'd like, and you get bonus content, extra resources, and extra connection to me throughout. That can be found on patreon.com/superfeeler, or again in the notes below. Thanks again, and have a great day.